Hello, we're back, and we're on the other side, so now we're keeping it fresh. I'm Ken.
I'm Nicole.
And welcome back to Access. Today we're doing Ruth, everyone's favorite.
It is.
How many times have you done a Bible study, Nicole, with a women's group at a church studying Ruth?
About a gazillion.
Yeah, it's one of the books. In Esther, I don't get as much. Do you?
Well, I only get really negative views of Esther.
Really?
Yeah.
I like Esther.
I like it too, but
we'll get to that.
We'll get there when we get there.
But we'll get there when we get there. It's The Incredibles. It's from The Incredibles.
I love that movie.
Yeah, when they're flying through. Are we there yet? We'll get there when we get there.
Okay.
In the spaceship.
Well, we're at Ruth now.
When we're there. I'm going to do authorship and pieces on the writing. Very little to talk about with Ruth. We just don't really know a whole lot about the authorship. And it's not terribly relevant. So we are trying to be honest with you to not try to push things that aren't important when they're really not. So we're not entirely sure. Nicole's going to talk about the literary context of where it's placed. That's the most that I think we can really talk about.
And that's really the most interesting stuff.
So hit it.
Yeah. So the book of Ruth, in itself, takes place during the time of Judges. That's all it says. Is the first sentence. There you go. But the interesting thing about Ruth is that in the Bible, it's placed in two different places. Whether, or in the Hebrew Bible, it's placed in with the Psalms and Proverbs kind of area of the text. And in the Christian Bible, it is placed in between Judges and 1 Samuel. Okay, so the Christian Bible puts it in between Judges and 1 Samuel. And what this does is that it really sets up the stage for the fall of Saul and the rise of King David. If you read back into Judges 19 through 21, which we didn't talk about, but you should have read it last week.
Nicole's watching you.
You see that that the place that Saul is from is the place where all the rowdy, disobedient Hebrews live.
That's right.
So anyone from that place, it's kind of like the bad
Benjamin, in the Benjamin hood.
It's the bad part of town where only disobedient Jews live. And then Saul emerges from there, and guess what? He's disobedient. Shocking.
Who could have known?
Who could have known? Then you have the story of Ruth. And the last chapter of Ruth, which we'll talk about a little bit more, has Ruth as the grandmother of David. And Ruth is a Moabite. She's not a Jew or a Hebrew at this point. So, where Saul is ethnically pure, in that sense, David would be ethically pure. And that's the difference.
Nice.
Interesting, huh?
Nice.
Yes, and it sets up for why the Davidic line is the one that's really chosen by God, that are the upstanding ones.
Now, what's the meaning in the placement in the Hebrew Bible?
I like that question, Ken.
Yes.
When you read it within the Hebrew Bible, next to Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, part of the wisdom literature, it comes across as a long parable, very similar to the Good Samaritan that we find later in Luke. Of the outsider is the one that's loyal, is the one that does the right things, where the insiders, the people who would expect, are the ones who fall short.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
And it's totally different depending on the placement.
All right. Shall I say a word now?
Please.
All right, because you may be wondering at home, or wherever you are watching this, what do you mean Hebrew Bible and Old Testament? Aren't they the same thing? No, they're not. The books are largely the same, but the order is radically different. As we're going through this study, we're following the order of the Christian Old Testament. So you've got the Torah, the first five books of the Bible, then the history section, then a section called the wisdom literature, or the prophets rather, and well, it's the wisdom and then the prophets, and that ends it. The Hebrew Bible, on the other hand, is set up very differently. It has three components, and it's the Tanakh is what we call it, but that stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah means the law, the first 5 books. That's the same. But then the Nevi'im, they put the prophets in the second spot there. And then they put the Ketuvim, which are called the writings, which are largely some of the more, the later writings. It's somewhat historical in that sense. And every once in a while, the differences here will be very meaningful. For instance, the Christian Old Testament ends with Malachi, which all the Gospels kind of use to point to John the Baptist, who's preaching in the wilderness. The Hebrew Bible, on the other hand, ends with 2nd Chronicles, which has a vision of restoration after the Babylonian exile and the temple being rebuilt and going back up into the temple. And so the way you end a book, of course, is very meaningful.
It's kind of like a cliffhanger at a season finale.
Yeah, and a hopeful end.
Yeah.
So you can always look at the differences between the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible, and then the Christian Old Testament.
There's lots of resources on this kind of stuff. And Ken and I would be happy to give you more titles.
Or Wikipedia.
Or Wikipedia. Let's face it, that's where we're going to go. And we're not going to go there.
So Nicole, you're going to do the great speech of Ruth and Naomi. Tell us the story.
Okay, so Naomi has 2 sons. They have 2 Moabite wives.
That's just hard to say. Moabite wives. They're from Utah.
So the Moabites are not part of the Hebrew people, so they're not living in, I guess, Israel.
They're outside.
They're outside the Promised Land at this point. And there's a famine. The husbands/sons die. And so Naomi is left with her 2 daughters-in-law. And you have Ruth, and you have Orpha, which is where Oprah gets her name, because her name's just misspelled. It's true.
It is. No, I looked that up myself.
I heard it on Oprah. From Oprah.
from Oprah's mouth.
I'm going to trust her.
I like Oprah better than
Orpha?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I do too. Good choice, Oprah's mom.
Good choice.
And Naomi kind of releases them from their family obligation. Says, go get new husbands so you can be supported. Because widows just are not in a very good